Hello, my name is Dean Graves. This presentation is being made in conjunction with Forward Counseling, a Memphis-based mental health counseling service. The purpose of the presentation is to provide both individuals and mental health care professionals with information to help them better serve their clientele, but also heal. In this presentation, we talk about stress. And the reason that we talk about stress is regardless of the unwanted conditions that you as a human experience, it is as a result of stress. And we'll explain that as we go through this process. I asked a simple question to the groups that I usually teach: what is stress? I usually get responses that it is something that is overwhelming, something that is anxiety provoking. And stress certainly has those effects, but that in and of itself is not stress. Stress is a point in time experience, a single point in time experience. Stress is the difference, and I'm going to write this on the board because we're going to write a lot of things on the board. Stress is our subject matter. Stress is the difference between your expectations and how things really are. Your expectations are how you see the world, how we all see the world. When we see the world through our expectations, we see the world as we are, not as things really are. By this definition, in order to cease experiencing stress, all that we have to do is simply see things as they really are. But that's difficult to surrender those expectations enough in order to be able to do that. So everyone has expectations. So where do these expectations come from? Do you go to an expectation store and simply buy a package? The answer is undoubtedly no. Our expectations are a result of our experiences. Everyone has experiences. No one can stop having experiences until they die. What is the purpose of experiences? Why have experiences? The sole purpose of having experiences is to learn. That's easy enough. What can we learn about? The only thing that we can learn about is ourselves. We have experiences and we learn about ourselves in relation to people, places, and things. We perceive that we're learning about other people, places, and things, but we are actually exploring and learning about ourselves. We perceive an experience to last from 30 minutes to an hour or some period of time. The reality is that every thought is a complete experience. Every time that you think a thought, you have completed an experience. In those 30 minutes or hour-long periods of time that we perceive that we're having an experience, there are dozens of thoughts that occur. And with every single thought, we are obligated to make a decision. We have to decide whether that thought feels good and I like it, or it doesn't feel good and I don't like it. That decision is not based on any sort of rational or logical assessment. It is based purely on how we feel. We cannot go to the next thought until we make that decision. Now, what is included in a thought? A thought can be broken down into three sections. One, there is an environment. An environment is always necessary to have a thought. Well, I need a spell check for this board. It didn't come with an app. Also, is some sort of stimulus. The stimulus is the action part, or change. Every thought, every experience includes change. The third, and possibly the most important part, is ourselves. And in that is the condition that we are in at the time that we are processing that thought. We can have or participate in an experience or a thought today being in one condition and participate in repeat that same thought 6 months from now and have a completely different interpretation of that experience because we are different than we were the first time that we had that experience. And so the environment, the stimulus, or the nature of the change and the condition that we are in is necessary part of every thought. There is no experience that we can have that is not included in a thought, which also includes our perception of the authenticity of physicality. When we touch this board and identify this board as being physical, we only are able to do that because it is part of that environment that is included in the thought. So we have experiences in order to learn. When we are born, from the instant we are born, there is some period of time between when we are born and the time that we have our first experience. In that period of time, we are a clean canvas, and we can paint anything on that canvas that we want to. And we begin to write on that canvas by having experiences. The first experience that we have is unlike any other experience that we have because we have nothing to compare it to. We don't know whether we like it or we don't like it. It is just our first experience. Then we have our second experience. And the second experience and every thought thereafter is different because we do have something to compare it to. And that's important because it defines how humans learn. We learn by the process of analogy. We compare and contrast every new experience with our resume of experiences that we have accumulated to date. The resume of experiences is our assignment of those things that we like and those things that we don't like. We continue to do this our entire lifetime. We are doing that today. Each thought that you were processing at this moment, you are doing the same thing, but you are comparing every new thought that you have with your entire resume of experiences that you've accumulated over a lifetime. Now, in this decision of like or don't like, we want to ensure that we get more of what we like. No one is motivated to get more of what they don't like. What we perceive that we like may vary based upon our experiences, but no one is motivated to get more of what we like. To ensure, and I'm going to erase part of this so I'll have more room on the board, to ensure that we get more of what we like, we create what is called an identity. What is an identity? An identity is everything that you think that you are, everything that I think that I am. This identity is formed based upon the experiences that we have had in order to get more of what we like. And I'm going to rewrite this over here, that expectations versus reality is the definition of stress. Based on this identity, we create expectations. Those expectations are how we interpret every new experience. If we don't have our expectations met, that means that someone, person, place, or thing is not recognizing our identity and not giving us more of what we like. When that occurs, we experience stress. That is what stress is. Every time that we experience stress, that's because some person, primarily, place or thing, does not recognize our identity, meet our expectations, or give us more of what we like. And stress is that simple. However, as long as we continue to maintain this identity, we will continue to experience stress. So stress is actually an indicator to us of the healing that we need to do in order to experience less stress. Creation of this identity can be divided into three parts as well. We have a basic part, we have a social part, and we have a hedonistic part. Hedonistic part is anything that provides us with momentary or immediate gratification. While we remain heavily locked into the perception of the authenticity of our identity, most of our experiences we're going to interpret in a hedonistic way. It is chaotic. By its very nature, it is chaotic. Someone who dwells primarily in momentary or immediate gratification is considered to be an immature person. Has nothing to do with their age. It has to do with the advancement along the evolutionary path. The social aspects are primarily things that we would associate with morality or ethics. Most of the beliefs that we have would be incorporated into the social aspect. This includes everything from patriotism, integrity, all of those more existential characteristics, but you're not mutually exclusive to dwelling only in the social aspect of the identity. You oftentimes will float between these two. In other words, some aspects of your day and your perceptions will be in the hedonistic, some will be in the social. The more time that you spend with the awareness of your social characteristics, the less stress you're going to experience because more of your identity has been surrendered. The basic is stuff that we're born with. We perceive ourselves to be male or female. We perceive ourselves to be a certain race. We have certain characteristics that we may be born with from a physical, what we would perceive to be a physical handicap standpoint. All of those are considered part of the basic aspect because in the basic, that sets the framework for the nature of the experiences and how we will interpret those experiences throughout our lifetime. We want this identity to work because this identity was formed for the sole purpose of providing us more of what we like. And so beginning at an early age, in infancy, we begin to create what are called pillars of support for this identity. And we begin, for example, to make friends. When you were in the first grade, prior to the first grade, most of your experiences were probably provided by family, siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles, that sort of thing, maybe a few kids in the neighborhood. When you go to first grade, you're in a whole new situation. You're in a class with 30 kids, don't know anybody, every other kid in the class is in the same condition. By the afternoon of the first day, you've identified, for example, 2 kids on the other side of the room that you're going to be friends with, and they've decided that they're going to be your friends as well. What has occurred there is you have recognized their identities, they've recognized your identities, you've met each other's expectations and given each other more of what you like, so in their presence you feel less stress, and so you identify them as friends. Now, over the course of time, those friends have probably changed, they've gone away. But we use the same procedure in order to make friends today. When you meet someone, if they recognize your identity, you recognize their identity, you meet each other's expectations, you feel less stress. So you like hanging out with them because they reinforce your identity. And friends become a significant pillar of support for our identity. Same is true of family. We may have lots of family, but they're not all pillars of support for our identity. And there's a reason for that. Most families have somebody in the family that feels the need in order to maintain family connections. And say, this is Aunt Tilly. So Aunt Tilly arranges a family reunion. And she invites all of these cousins and aunts and uncles and people that you've never met before to this family reunion, and say there are 50 people there, and you go to a park one weekend day, and everybody's meeting and greeting and hi, I'm so and so forth, and from here and there, and introducing each other. But by the middle of the day, you and probably 3 or 4 people are sitting at a picnic table together, because those 3 or 4 people, along with you, recognize each other's identity, meet each other's expectations, and are giving you more of what you like, and you are giving them more of what they like. And so you identify with those, even though everybody there is family. Another principal pillar of support are groups that we join. Why do we join groups? Well, groups have an identity of their own because some aspect of the individuals that belong in that group also have a common interest. In order to join that group, you have to identify with the group identity. The group identity has to recognize your identity, and you have to feel comfortable because that group, relatively speaking, meets your expectations and gives you more of what you like. And vice versa. This must be reciprocal. If you're the only one that is getting more of what you like, and no one else in these pillars of support is reciprocating your feeling, they are not going to maintain their posture as pillars of support for your identity. We change groups when our identity changes, or the group identity can change, but it's much more probable that your identity is going to change than the group identity. If you think of the group as a ocean-going steamliner in a river, it's possible possibly to get it turned around, but very difficult to do so. But you can jump out of the group fairly quickly. If you decided, for example, that you wanted to join a religion or participate in a religion, and so you go and you try several different churches, and you don't feel comfortable with the people in 3 or 4 of the first churches that you go to. The 4th one you do. Regardless of the beliefs of the religion, you're not going to return to that church if you don't feel comfortable with the people. So your comfort level with the group is going to determine whether you join that group. These continue to fill our life. We choose a spouse the same way. The person that you choose to be a spouse is chosen because they meet your expectations, because they recognize your identity and give you more of what you like, and vice versa. Again, it must be reciprocal. And so we choose a spouse based upon this same scenario of meeting each other's expectations and giving each other more of what they like. When that ceases to occur, they call that divorce. And when you get a divorce, you lose a pillar of support for the identity. Now, these pillars of support can go on endlessly, and they can be people, places, or things. If you have a particular attraction to material things that may have sentimental value, that can be a pillar of support for an identity. It can also be a place that you may have lived your whole life, for example, and that is serving as a pillar of support for your identity. When we lose a pillar of support, then the stability of our identity becomes questionable. The authenticity of our identity becomes questionable. When we reach a certain age, not necessarily level of maturity, because maturity is more identified by how we have progressed in surrendering our identity. But when we usually reach a certain age, which can begin in the latter teenage years, more often than not begins to materialize more firmly when we reach our 20s, then this identity becomes significantly who we are. And we enter into a stage of what is called stasis. Now, the reason it's called stasis is because once we have become comfortable with that identity, then we want to not change that identity any more than we have to. And so we enter into the process of trying to manage the world around us in order to recognize and meet our expectations rather than us continuing to change. The reality is that every time we process a thought, we're making an assessment. We're determining by virtue of our awareness the reaction that you are having, you being anybody outside of me, to my identity. If I can adjust that just a teeny tiny bit to get more of what I like, then I will adjust that identity, but that notwithstanding, if I can see that my identity, some aspect of my identity is not working, it's not getting me more of what I like, then I'll tweak that identity. And I tweak the identity for the sole purpose of trying to trick you into giving me more of what I like. This continues until we become adequately aware to understand that this identity is not going to work. When we reach that point, then we are ready to begin healing. But when someone reaches that stage and stays in that stage of being in a condition of stasis, then they continually and perpetually experience increasing amounts of identity, and they limit the scope of the pillars of support that are participating. We are all motivated, everyone is motivated to find greater stability, but we confuse stasis for stability. The difference between stasis and stability is stasis doesn't anticipate change. Stability does anticipate change. It anticipates the flexibility of that identity until that identity eventually goes away. We know that that identity has gone away because we no longer experience stress. This identity, regardless of the identity, is always false. There is no identity that is true, because it is based upon not only our experiences, but also how we've interpreted those experiences. And I offer as an illustration, if this was the total range of possible human experience, at one end is absolute bliss. The other end is absolute despair. Somewhere in between here, you, me, everyone that is human has encountered a range of experiences. Despair is one step above death. It is an absolute loss of hope. It's not a matter of you killing yourself, it's a matter of you just dying. There's nothing left. Bliss is the exact opposite of that. Someone who is blissful does not experience a moment of stress throughout their entire day. There is absolutely no stress. Somewhere in the middle here is the range of experience that you, being a human, have experienced. That's the worst experience that you've ever had. That's the best experience you've ever had. This identity is created based upon the best experience that you've ever had. Now let's assume that you were a child that was born into an abusive family. The worst experience you've ever had is being abused 5 times a day. The best experience that you've ever had is being abused 1 time a week. This identity is going to be created based upon that best experience. And if you try to maintain that identity throughout your lifetime, then unless you are abused 1 time a week, you are not getting what you like. But you are a long distance away from the potential of bliss. This identity is the obstacle that we as humans all experience, all encounter, and need to surrender in order to experience greater happiness and greater bliss. Now, this is a process. As we go through life, we have changes, which is an inherently part of every thought that we experience. And say, for example, that we lose a spouse. Now, we say that we enter into the condition of grief. What is the condition of grief? We've lost a pillar of support for our identity. If this was your house, and these were the pillars that hold the foundation of your house up, and this was the pillar, the spouse was the pillar that held your back bedroom up, you wouldn't feel comfortable going into that bedroom. The whole floor sagging when you walked in that part of the house. So there is inherently in the experience of loss of a pillar of support, there is fear. Fear that the identity that we have created is not authentic, is not real. We also fear not getting more of what we like, which is heartache, because invariably, and there's no exception to this, what we all like is love. But if you go back to that reference that I made earlier, when we are born, we are a clean canvas. We don't know anything, including we do not know what love is. This entire process that we do as humans is so we will know what love is when we encounter love. What we don't like invariably is fear. And so when we experience something that we like, we interpret that as being love. Now this is a process. Understand that this is the best experience that we've ever had, being abused one time a week. Based upon our experiences, we're going to interpret that as love. That is all we know. So when we lose a pillar of support, two things happen. We fear the instability of our identity. We fear not getting the love or experiencing the heartache that we need. It is not a matter of wanting, it's a matter of needing. We are pre-programmed to need love. Now, while we remain in this hedonistic phase of our identity operation, then we are concerned with immediate gratification. The pillars of support are they're not inconsequential, but they are very shallow, because this requires constant reinforcement. Understand that this is chaos. While we remain primarily in this aspect of our identity, this is chaos. Someone who is diagnosed with a sociopathic disorder. The sociopath is dealing exclusively in the hedonistic phase of their identity in seeking to reinforce that. They will work to reinforce that, and these become inconsequential as long as they are filled with items, people, places, or things that are supporting their identity, that are supporting their hedonistic needs. So we have limitations based upon our experience. These create a multitude, all of the unwanted conditions that we experience, mental, emotional, and predominantly the physical conditions that we experience as a result of how we have interpreted our experiences. Fortunately, we have the tool, inherently have the tool, in order to heal from all of that. The tool that we have is awareness. Now, awareness is a often misunderstood tool. While we maintain this identity, the awareness is pointed outside of us. We must be aware of people, places, and things and how they are reacting to us. In other words, remember, we can only learn about ourselves in relation to other people, places, and things. While we maintain this identity, our awareness must be pointed outside of us in order to measure how effective that identity is in tricking the world into loving us. While we maintain that identity, then our awareness is pointed outside of us. When we decide that this isn't working, when we're not getting more of what we like, then we begin to surrender this identity because we turn that same awareness inside and begin to look inside of ourselves to see what aspects of that identity are not true. We move sequentially from the hedonistic phase, when we are seeking immediate gratification, to the social stage, of our identity, which includes all of those things that we consider so important, like morality and ethics and integrity. Eventually, we move to the basic aspects of it and surrender those as well. Now, you remember when we talked in the beginning, we were talking about what is included in the thought. The self and the condition of the self is an inherent part of every thought. We perceive that love is an emotion. The only characteristics, the only aspect of any emotion is our decision of whether it feels good and I like it, or it doesn't feel good and I don't like it. All of those thousands of names for emotions that we've come up with are actually conditions that we enter into in order to process the next thought. So when we lose a pillar of support and we enter into the condition of grief, that is the condition that we are in. It doesn't feel good, so we don't like it. But grief in and of itself is not an emotion. Love is not an emotion. Love is a condition of being. All humans are love. Regardless of how despicable a person you may perceive them to be, underneath this false identity, they are love. All the times in your life that you have felt love because you have temporarily surrendered that identity long enough to feel who you really are. When we are with our spouse and we've determined that we love our spouse, then what we are actually saying when we tell them that we love them, as you meet my expectations, I surrender my identity temporarily and feel who I really am. You are already loved. When we say we love our children, and if you really think about it, why do we love our children? I mean, they arrive and they keep us up all night, they pee and poop all over us, we have to go out in the middle of the night and buy diapers. Why do we love them? Because when we are with them, we can only be mom or dad. We can't be this false identity. And when we are that false identity with our children, they tell us to get lost. Just like our spouse should and does tell us to get that identity, leave it out on the front porch when you come home, and be who you really are. So this is the condition that we all experience. This is stress. Every time that somebody or something does not recognize your identity, what is actually happening is they are disrespecting you. They are not recognizing the authenticity of your identity. They're not meeting your expectations. They're not giving you more of what you like, and consequently, you experience stress. Now that concludes the introductory presentation. This is the problem. This is the problem that as humans that we all experience. Now the reason that we experience that, as I said before, is to learn what we don't like. If you have decided that chocolate ice cream is your favorite flavor of ice cream, and when you walk into the ice cream store, there's 150 flavors there, but you're going to the chocolate because you know that's your favorite flavor. How did you determine that? Very simply, you determined that because you had to taste all 149 other flavors. Not necessarily every one, but you can do them by groupings because we are sentient beings. All that we're doing by going through this process is tasting the other flavors of ice cream that we have determined that we don't like in order to discover what love is. Once we discover what love is, we'll have surrendered that identity and become who we really are. When you achieve the surrender of the identity and feel who you are, then you experience bliss all the time because you no longer experience stress. Thank you for listening and watching. Please tune in for our next presentation. We'll follow up on this, use this as the basis to deal with more specific conditions that humans deal with. Thank you.